Welcome to the Hummel Studios and the Journos. Delighted you could join us on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to come and join the football family. Hugh MacDonald and Steve McGowan are here with me. I wonder what we're going to talk about. European football, it dominates our thoughts. The misery of Celtic in Austria. The impending doom as our other clubs try and somehow salvage some credibility by getting into group stage European football as well. It's a difficult night for Celtic fans to stomach. Is it one of the worst in their history?
I think in the context it is. You know, people will start screaming about, Kairat Almaty even a year ago was bad, Art Media, Bratislava, etc., etc. But I think the circumstances of this made it an absolutely calamitous, catastrophic night. And they just need one stat, 4-0 up. With 60 minutes to go on aggregate, and you can't get it over the line. And I think that was, I think it's a result as well that has so many far-reaching consequences. I mean, it's going to be a long time before any kind of viable route to the Champions League is going to be open to Scottish clubs. And this was, viewed as, if not last chance saloon, but certainly a chance to celebrate 3-0 up. So I think it's certainly the most calamitous result in Celtic's history, European history.
We could analyse, and we will undoubtedly get to the whole structure of Celtic as you discuss it. But for the game itself, I mentioned to Hugh that so many Celtic fans ahead of it that I'd spoken to, go into a game after a 3-0 win saying, this isn't over. And if they can see it, how the board couldn't see it again is even more disturbing, because there was calls evidently, from a manager in press conference after press conference saying quality over quantity, needed it, fell on deaf ears.
Well, there are two schools of thought, I think, after that game. One of them is that the board are negligible for failing to bring in the players they clearly needed, a number 6, a physical, mobile, box-to-box midfielder to replace Arne Engels, and the money was there for that. They don't have a backup left-back. They have a plan in place for that for M&L of Chelsea, but they haven't done it yet. I think he's a slight knock. They're going to need a right-back. So there will be people who will think that, again, it's a case of fail to prepare, prepare to fail. There is another camp who think there is enough blame to go around, who'll look at Martin O'Neill, who'll look at the game plan, who'll look at the substitutions, who will look at the players who lacked physicality, who lacked mental strength, who lacked the ability to pass the ball to players in green and white shirts in a second half, which was best viewed through the cracks of the fingers. It was excruciating, I think it's fair to say. And I think if you look at it from top to bottom, from board, Dermot Desmond, to Martin O'Neill, to Sean Maloney, to the players, there is enough blame to go around for this one. It was a pretty calamitous situation.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would disagree with your overall assessment of it. If you were looking at the cold light of day as a manager, he's 74, he's old enough, big enough, man enough at the end of a game to say it falls on his shoulders. If you were analysing Martin, Sean, Mark Fotheringham as a group and look at it and say the tactics were wrong, but I think you can get your tactics wrong, but sometimes a player or a couple of players can paper over the cracks of the weaknesses that you have in your side if you get a goal. I mean, if you score a goal and you're suddenly 4-0 up, Stephen, I'm looking, I'm saying to myself, surely they must say to themselves, they're not really great at the back, Celtic, so why not shut up shop and try and defend it with what little quality you have at that level? Get your Dane Murray on, get your Scales on, get midfielders on who can somehow block the space that was there. If you're giving a side over 35 shots and you're allowing them the space to come and swarm all over your back line, and by the way, a back line which has a guy who can only play an hour, another guy who is injury prone in Cameron Carter-Vickers, and then the inexperience that you've got in Colby Donovan.
But that goes back to who are you protecting them with? You're going to put on 5'7" Rio Hatate? Well, they did that. Put on Luke McCowan, that didn't work either.
Yep.
You're putting on central defenders to replace knackered fullbacks or injured fullbacks. I mean, there is I think what last night exposed was a rampant lack of depth and quality in the squad in general. But to go back to your key point, if you're going to do that, you do it at half-time, don't you?
Yeah.
That was the time to do it. And the minute you saw them scoring an early second half goal, you thought, oh.
No, I very much.
That's when you thought, 48 minutes, you've got to come through that first 10 minutes of second half. Now, to play devil's advocate, I think Celtic were pretty comfortable in the first half, really. They had a luck occasionally, as you might expect. But for Nygren's head fart, if I can use that word.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, they would have been okay, but they looked as if they had more goals in them. And I don't think anyone saw just how calamitous that second half would be. Although in saying that, let's be honest, everyone was nervous going into the game. Everybody knew that the first leg result was an anomaly, that it wasn't really a 3-0 game. So I think probably the surprise for me is that they got into a position where they were 4-0 ahead in the first place.
I agree. I think what really perturbed me was the approach to the game after 90 minutes at Celtic Park, because the real takeaway from Celtic Park was Celtic scored 3 worldies, absolute, top class European goals, and there was so much pressure on them from midfield that could have negated 3 world-class goals. I mean, that could have been a 3-2, it could even have been a 3 each. But even watching from high in the stands as I was, every time that the LASK got the ball in midfield, it was like running forward with the bugle going and and immediately facing a fragile back four.
But they had 20 shots in that game as well, Hugh.
That's what I'm saying. So you'd think that you would sit down and say, well, how are we going to combat that when we go over there? And they didn't. And one of the reasons that you know that they didn't was they picked the exact same team. So you had, they were saying, no, this team that got us 3-0 will be good enough to do to protect the lead over there. I thought, as Stephen says, I think if you went through every department at Celtic, the board, you could say, I think every player who doesn't play in a disastrous game automatically becomes a better player.
Yeah.
That's the way of football. But you'd think Engels had to be replaced. You had to have somebody. You couldn't go into a midfield. And we actually used the words, a midfield, Nygren, Bauer and McGregor's been lightweight. You can't, that was never going to work at that level. So they've also haven't, got a guy in the door, as Stephen says, for a guy that they know, without injuries or anything, they know will only play 60 minutes, 65 minutes. That's what he does. And if you suck that up and say the good stuff comes with that, and fair enough, but you must have a guy that steps straight in. So the board automatically are guilty for that. But the setup was incomprehensible. The lack of reactions, the substitutions. Again, though, you can only substitute what you've got on the bench. I thought there was a case, certainly at one point, for bringing Hassan on, and even moving Duran to centre forward and taking Who off.
Gineitis was.
Gineitis was a baffling. McCowan was as well. I mean, but he doesn't have any. I mean, everybody. The great thing now is God bless poor Luke McCowan. He's getting battered from pillar to post. He had an awful game. We know that. But getting him thrown on against a midfield that was coming, I think it spooked him.
Well, let's look at the first goal. Nygren.
Right.
Appalling lapse in judgment. Gives it the ball. Gives the opposition a goal. Second goal. Austin Trusty on the right hand side. He is ushering the ball back towards his own corner flag, and somehow or other he manages to be out muscled by the other player. And one pass later, bang! It's 2-1. You look at the McCowan mistake. Individual errors.
Absolutely.
So, and I suppose if you're the manager, you would say, well, How do I legislate for that?
Because well, you legislate for it by buying the quality that he was asking for instead of the quantity.
Well,
and that part of it is quite simply that these players make those mistakes because they can't play at that level, and that is not just an isolated situation for me, Stephen. It has been, and I know Hugh and I have had our ding-dongs about it on this show for easily a decade and more. In fact, since this PLZ soccer started on these programmes, we've had ding-dongs about it because, quite simply, the evidence stacks up from 2003, 2004.
Well,
It stacks up because there is a recurring strategy. And again, you've got to, and I try my very best to offer a balance on this. And the balance is this. If your strategy is to constantly wait to the end of a transfer window, roll a dice and hope that you get the riches of a European Premier competition, if that's the strategy, then the odds are stacked against you. And the odds are they've only qualified 3 times. And over and above that, if your strategy is we're going to run it as a business and take £1 to £3 million punts on players, and then every now and then we might roll out a Virgil van Dijk, a Victor Wanyama, and Kyogos and people like that that we can sell on for huge amounts. If that's your strategy, you as a business, well done. Congratulations to you, because over 23 years you've managed to stack up a lot of money. But the other part of it is you cannot take the success of your business with a fan base that craves European, half-decent European performances, and also a fan base that's given them a lot of money, who's saying to you, listen, you need to change that strategy in the recruitment. They want a bit more ambition. Not winning the Champions League, they just want a bit more ambition. And that is where I think the biggest criticism of this Celtic board has come. You can have the balance sheet, but you can't have the plaudits from the fans when you're getting spanked by mediocre.
Well, how much better would the balance sheet have been had they beaten Kairat Almaty? Had they beaten LASK Linz? Had they beaten Cluj? Had they beaten Ferencváros? Had they beaten Malmo? Had they beaten Maribor? Forgive me if I'm missing out AEK Athens or 1 or 2 others along the way. The point is that
I think you've got them all.
Celtic's turnover was 134 million, the last recorded. LASK was 42 million. And this is a persistent pattern. They are losing these ties to teams who have inferior turnovers and infrastructures, and who just happen to do so much more with so much less. And you can say, yes, it's a good business model. Well, is it? If your key performance indicator is qualifying for the Champions League, and in 8 of the last 10 attempts at a playoff, you've failed. I don't know how successful you can say that is.
No, but I'll argue that point with you. It is successful if you are an accountant and a businessman that's just looking at the balance sheet, Stephen. It is successful. And your Michael Nicholsons and your Dermot Desmonds and your Peter Lawwell and every other person who's been on that board will look at it and say, that is successful. We are now in a situation, from their point of view, they are saying to themselves, we are now in a situation where even without the 2025 accounts and the player sales that will come in from that as well, they will have, if not over 100 million, then certainly 100 million in the bank. That is their view on it as successful as a strategy.
But Peter, they've just lost £40 million, although they'll get some money from the Europa League, of course, but it will be far less than we get in the Champions League. And the last year's accounts had 2 paragraphs of what saying, we recognise the frustration of supporters at dealings in the transfer market and the failure to deliver in the key strategy of qualifying for the Champions League. We will endeavour to improve. That was a message, we will improve. And they tried to go for prioritise quality over quantity, and they were getting some credit for that, but they didn't bring in enough quality. Ultimately, there's still this reluctance to push the button on deals that need to be done until they see if they're in the Champions League, and again, it's cost them.
Yeah, Hugh, I'm not playing it as I'm trying hard to offer a balance on it. And the balance is quite simply, as a group of accountants and a group that have managed to get a situation where, as a business, it looks as if it's bomb-proof. And the reason why is you've got close on 60,000 fans who don't want to give up their season ticket because it's a way of life for a lot of them. They don't want to give up their season ticket, so they are absolutely 100% stick on for the finances. Then you've got the merchandise over and above that. Then you've got this player strategy that they've gone for. Everything stacks up. And then, since 2003, 2004, going on, apart from maybe 5 or 6 times where Rangers have managed to upset the apple cart, you have complete dominance domestically because of all those things that I've mentioned before make them basically unbeatable domestically. They're unbeatable domestically. It doesn't matter if it's 1 trophy, 2 trophies, trebles, quadruple trebles. They are unbeatable domestically because they can eventually just do enough to see off the opposition.
Well, last season was a sign of that. I mean, there was a revolving door of managers. There was a big injury list amongst our top players. There was lack of form amongst other players. They had a trolley dash around the loans market in January and just stuffed the bag with anybody they could pick up and won a double. So that shows the dominance. You know, that was... I always think, though, that there's an interesting argument to have about the dominance, though, I think, is that the dominance almost precludes any sort of long-term planning in terms of let's take a breath, let's look at this season and okay, we'll not go for the league and the cup. This will be a season we bring in a manager, that's going to build something in 2 or 3 years. That can't be done. It can be done at LASK. They can be done at Michelin, they can be done at AEK Athens, they can be done all these clubs that have beaten Celtic Cluj that they don't win the league every year, So this dominance has I think the Nongsi thing, I think Nongsi was the wrong man, wrong place and all that, but what Nongsi was coming in thinking, I've got time to impose that, and if he'd been given time, who knows, whatever. But that's a pointless argument. Yeah. You've got to come in and win. So they've got this strong thing about let's be dominant in Scotland because that's our bread and butter, and let's have a go at you. Instead of saying, do you know what? See, for the next couple of seasons, we want to do really well in Europe. That's nonsense. No Celtic fan would sign up for that either.
No, and you mentioned there, a Wilfred Nancy situation, but I go back to, and this strengthens the case, Steve, and I go back to Ronnie Deila. Ronnie Deila was a disaster, but he's still able to get 2 titles. You know what I mean? He was an absolute disaster as a manager. The players couldn't stand him. The tactics alone and the methods in the background created all sorts of madness. You only have to look at the evidence of when there was a period where there was a good coach come in. Now, we can all have our thoughts on Brendan Rodgers, but he was a good coach. And when he wanted to show that ambition that was shared by the Celtic fans, he was derailed as well. So the evidence is there since that period where, as a business, successful, and Hugh's just mentioned there, they should have taken a breath. To take a breath and scrutinise yourself, that requires humility. This board doesn't have it. This is an arrogant board with a majority shareholder who will not be told. And the fan base, when they actually voiced their concerns, were told, be quiet, behave.
Well, we've said often enough sitting here that nothing really will change at Celtic until everything changes. I get tired of hearing myself saying it, but the culture of the club appears to be ingrained. I mean, they've tweaked it slightly this year to bring in more expensive players. Okay, that's acknowledged. And let's be honest, the week or so fans are quite happy with that. But that's probably a sign of how much expectation has diminished. That they're happy with 2 or 3 quality players coming in, when actually what they really need is 6 or 7. And again, okay, there was no near beat on playing central defender last night, like a Stan or a Beersheva, but it felt like it.
Yeah.
It felt like a team that was imbalanced and hopelessly ill-prepared for the 2 games that set the tenet for the season ahead. It's happening time and time again.
But you mentioned there, you suggested there that there's been some sort of shift. There wasn't a shift.
There was. Because they were signing players. You said earlier they were signing players for £2.5 or £3 million. They've clearly pushed the boat out to go higher this time.
No, but
it hasn't worked.
No, but let me finish. the point I was making where there wasn't a shift is the smokescreen still stuck to the plan. It's still stuck to the plan. They'd offloaded 16 players, Stephen, and they've got a profit of about 10, 12 million. So they may well have agreed to Martin's quality, but they still played the same, it was still the same trick, which was basically, we'll sign 4 players, we'll give you your quality, we're not going to push the boat out for the other 4 you need, because remember, at one point Brendan Rodgers said that they needed a significant change and significant quality brought in. That never materialised. What they did do is they were able to bring in vast amounts of money from the 16 players that they'd offloaded, and they bought 4 players within that budget, still having in excess of 77 million. So the argument that stacks up is, yes, they did buy the quality in those 4 players, but they didn't break.
Well, they're still in profit.
But they didn't break the strategy.
Yeah, they're still in profit. I mean, Arnie Engels, the figure reported was 22 million. You got Diza Meda with 10. You got Mike Navotsky or whatever, and 1 or 2 fringe players have gone out.
Even all these
So
ones.
the interesting thing will be to see what happens now, because obviously the Champions League income is gone. They will have to be revising the kind of figures that we're looking at on Saturday morning, for example. They were looking to go and bring in Gineitis, the Torino midfielder, who's 6'3" Lithuanian midfielder, who was going to be that number 6. We're going to bring in the guy Emanello, the Chelsea left back, on loan. We're going to try and bring in a right back on loan. You can discuss whether they should or whether they should stick with Colby Donovan. It'd be interesting to see what happens with those plans now, whether they persevere with those or whether they pull up a drawbridge. The fact is, as I said, they're still in profit. There shouldn't be any big difference. They should still be looking to try and go and improve the team. The regret for fans is that they are bolting the stable door after the horse is halfway to
Absolutely.
Hamilton.
And I think the other regret for fans is that everything, whether you qualify for Champions League or not, everyone was clear what you needed. I mean, it wasn't, you don't need to be, on a data analysis or something. You can just you look at that team and you said, and I know Colby Donovan played very well in the first leg, but even in the first leg, you're looking at him saying, do you see him playing, 40 games this season? No, you're going to need a good backup right back, because Johnson, who knows with Johnson, he either gets fit or he goes, and then if he gets fit, he'll get injured. And God bless him, but that's the way of it. So you're saying you want Colby Donovan. Are you looking for Colby Donovan for a whole year playing at top level? No, I don't
How
think.
does he ever get to the level he needs to get to if we don't play him? But that's a different argument.
But I'm saying I don't think he can. I don't think he's got it yet to play at that level for 40 games. I think he can play for 40 games for Motherwell or somebody else. I just don't think he can play. And I think it was shown, when. So I think that was a predictable one. There was the other one, the left back, was a predictable one. You need a left back for back up to Kieran Tierney. And the number 6 one, every Celtic fan has been talking about it, all close. I mean, even beyond that, I mean, we need a 6. We need a 6. So this all predates the Champions League and where you play in Champions League or not. Have they got enough to win the league this year?
Yeah, absolutely, and this is the point I'm making. But you've mentioned there certain areas where they need strengthening. For me, Stephen, the evidence was clear from the centre of defence. I look at it and I say to myself, Trusty, suspect, Cameron Carter's injury prone. Last week, Cameron Carter's looked as if he was towing a caravan trying to chase that guy down when he had the gilt-edged opportunity. That centre of defence was weak, and it has been proved over the last couple of seasons to be weak. That's why they found themselves in a situation all last season where suddenly teams were able to take the scalp off them. I mean, Motherwell passed them off the park on 2 or 3 occasions.
Well, Carter Vickers has come back for a long-term injury, and he looks like it. Trusty is physically suspect against stronger centre forwards. So yeah, I mean, Ross Desmond, going back to that infamous AGM, said the landscape is changing. It's difficult to compete for clubs from smaller nations. We don't want to swing and miss. Well, no one's asking them to swing and miss. They're merely asking them to do enough to balance the squad and provide enough quality to beat LASK Linz, the champions of Austria, or to beat Kairat Almaty, the champions of Kazakhstan. There's no need to land any haymakers to do that. You should be able to do it just by doing your job, basically.
I don't know I don't think the change comes, Hugh. I can't see the change. I can only see a continuation. Obviously, right now, they're probably sitting in a darkened room with the PR people saying, listen, we need to work out how to put a spin on this, as they do continually for the last 23 odd years.
Oh, I disagree with that.
You don't think
I disagree with that? No, I don't. I mean, this stuff about briefing and spin, they don't do that.
They don't do that.
It doesn't happen. It's a myth.
Well, you think they're just going to say, well,
I don't think they'll say anything. They'll leave it to Martin and Neil to go out and face the media on Friday before they play against Falkirk at the weekend. That's it. It's all on the first team manager. There's no sporting director there. There is no chief executive who speaks to supporters or communicates. There's very much an attitude of we neither apologise nor explain.
That is totally on the ball, on the mark. There's no briefings. You know, people looking at the telly and say, "Oh, yeah, they tell you this." You see it on Twitter. Oh, he's been given this to. There's none of that. None of that. I can see that on the likes of. They're not sitting Peter's strategy. How do we get the press on our side, and how do we?
No. I'm not.
Are the fans even on our side?
I'm not for a minute suggesting that, but the last comments that have come out of Celtic Park were basically from Michael Nicholson suggesting, listen, it doesn't matter what we do. They've got it in for us. He tried to create a siege mentality, and then what he did was silence. And they did not say a word.
That's what I'm saying. They'll not say a word to anybody. I mean, not that long ago, people at Celtic would pick up a phone, and they might not give you very much, but there was a line of communication, a very tenuous one, and one in their terms, which, okay, that's fine. But not now. I mean, I get this, and I know Stephen does as well. You'll get this, oh, you know, so-and-so's been on the phone. No way.
Yeah. I would totally agree with that.
No way.
Yeah.
And whether that's a good strategy or a bad strategy, I'll leave to others to understand. But what it does leave them is there is an isolation about it. And I don't think they'll change in any way their PR strategy with the fans because of the reasons that you've said. I think there's a belief in there that you know, this is malcontents. There's a belief in there that this is people that have got access to grind and they'll just point to figures. We're running a very steady, financially stable club. Blah de blah de blah. Domestic dominance. Blah de blah. Very sorry about Europe. We'll try and do better. And that message will not be conveyed in any kind of call to Hugh MacDonald or Stephen McGowan or even, you know, in any statement from Celtic FC. It'll be put out in, you know, 2 paragraphs in the accounts.
Yeah, over and above that, I mean, let's not, and I can only talk from my own personal point of view. The last contact I had with anybody within Celtic was from the chief executive and, of course, their PR guy to tell me I was banned. I'm not an isolated incident because there's a whole raft of people who've now, obviously, over and above me and before me, who have been banned. Companies, individuals, former players, all that list is people that they don't want to be criticising them. They are the most important people in this, and it's irrelevant, you know, for bans for any of us. The most important people are the supporters, and they won't get that change, and I can't see it changing. They would be looking and saying, can you, first of all, are you capable of doing what you were talking about, is showing a modicum of humility, getting a strong communication line to the supporters, and changing your strategy to try and show that ambition? Well, the answer is emphatically no. Is there going to be a likelihood of a change of board, a handing over of the reins to another company to try and take it in a different way? The answer to that is emphatically no, because Dermot Desmond will just hand it on to his son unless something out of left field is saying that there's a huge company coming in to buy his shares. I can't see it.
Well, before change happens, you have to acknowledge there's a problem, don't you? That's the first step. I don't see any evidence of that. I mean, you would think that 8 failures in 10 playoffs would tell you that there's a problem and that there does need to be a fundamental look at how to do things, but that was promised last summer. And I would go back to the point, I mean, they have tried to adapt their transfer strategy to spend more on fees for a limited number of players. They just haven't brought in enough in time. And unfortunately, that just feels like the same old, same old.
Yeah. What do you think is the immediate situation? I mean, is it just a case of they now go for a lesser type of player that's enough to get them in the Europa League by coming out with the line, we can't sign those players, they don't want to come now? You know, is that it's not so much a spin, but is that the narrative?
That's intriguing. That'll be the intriguing thing in the weeks to come. I mean, I think they watched Gineitis again at the weekend there. That'll be, what, a £9 million player. Don't really know why that one couldn't have been done sooner. You know, I think that one's been rumoured for quite some time. They've been linked to various players. So it will be intriguing to see if they persevere with that, if they go and spend the money, or whether there's a bit of a pulling up of the ladder because of this innate fear of financial sustainability breaches and being fined by UEFA, which I don't really think is a particularly realistic prospect for Celtic, particularly when they're currently in profit for player trading. But you're talking about a cultural mindset, effectively. And Hugh and I talk about it. It's quite remarkable that for a body of men who are essentially conservative and cautious in their fiscal dealings, every year they take this enormous Champions League gamble.
What do you think is going to happen, Hugh? Or what do you think should happen? That's probably a better question.
There's two different things.
Yeah.
Two different things. Should happen, there should be a root and branch change to the whole football business strategy, coaching, bringing pathway, director of football with solid powers, a transfer committee that is divorced from the board, where the board only green lights and sets, the way Fenway do it. They've got a transfer committee. They set the budget, so you've got a committee that's not only charged with getting the players, but getting the deals over the line. So, the Fenway would think it would be ridiculous that you'd have a chief exec that was phoning agents or, sourcing players or trying to worry about sell-on fees. That, chief execs are much broader, bigger things. So have that, a very, very modern football department with a determined strategy of what you want to do and have your KPIs. Is your KPI European performance, or is your KPI domestic dominance? Because sometimes they don't align. We've seen that, they don't align. So what do you want to do? Where do you want to see the club go? I think the whole thing is complicated by the fact that the Champions League is a beautiful luxury liner that we're going like that to, as it sails off into the sunset. So that's difficult. We're going to, in Scotland, we're going to be dealing with our champions, I think, on a regular basis being Champions League or even Conference League teams, so that comes down. So that's what I think should happen. What will happen, I don't think, not much. I think if over the next week or two, it'll be interesting to see who they buy and who they don't buy. And I think the Champions League result has so many implications for that, not just on the finance of getting players in, but on the players maybe now saying, do you know what, I've got other offers. They want to come to Glasgow and play St Mirren and play such and such. Nah, I've got Feyenoord want me or whatever. So I think there'll be a drawing up the ladder.
Do you think there should be boardroom changes, individual head role, or an acceptance that maybe you've served your time?
Aye, but I mean, I've thought that for a long time, that there should be a real revolution in the boardroom. I think even with a majority shareholder who's got such power, there's still more than a capacity for having, strong, independent voices in the boardroom. You've got to remember that the boardroom under Fergus was astonishingly strong in quality. You had Brian Quinn, Deputy Governor of the Bank of England. You had Sir Patrick Sheehy. I mean, these weren't guys that were going to say to, Fergus got tell in board meetings, no, you're not doing that, right or wrong. Now you've got, the board is it's almost a passive kind of rubber stamping, or is there any huge ideas coming out of the boardroom, any huge strategies? I don't think so. But then again, it all goes back to the Dermot situation. You've got somebody in charge, and that's
Still
it.
no sign of a non-executive director being appointed to replace. Was it Tom Allison stepped down? And you wonder if that tells you something in itself about, because they will have been approaching high-quality individuals in the business world who probably support Celtic, who'll be looking at that situation and saying, how much say or how much autonomy or how much influence can I really exert?
Was Dominic McKay not a perfect example of that?
I don't know what circumstances were there. I mean, he was an executive. I'm talking about a non-executive director who is there to hold the board to account. And I think there will be people potentially looking at that who've been approached about that and thinking, I can't be a proper non-executive director because it's not really a board which functions in a way it should.
And then they go and they take that, and their reputation is compromised, because then they become part of it, instead of being their reputation being a billionaire or whatever. And we all know people who are out there who are literally serious businessmen, who would come to Celtic as a non-exec for zero, you know, or even pay their way because they're so mega wealthy. But these are guys, by their very DNA, are guys that want to come in and make changes and do things. They're not guys that come along and say, you know, we'll go to Linz in the plane and wear a blazer and you know, we'll help out with this or that. No, these are guys who say, why are we doing this? What's your strategy? Where are we in 5 years? You know, what's the wages to turnover? Why are we doing this? Why are the fans unhappy? Is there any way we can engage with the I mean, these guys, that's what they made their money on.
Well, rightly or wrongly, the perception is that in that boardroom, the only words that you're required to say is, yes, Mr. Desmond. That's the perception. They've done nothing to correct or arrest that. And I don't think that's really changing.
Martin's got a bloodied nose from this defeat and the exit from the Champions League. Is he in danger as they move forward now of a tarnished legacy with this? Will he become even more frustrated? Is there a situation where they sit down and you know, is he able or is he willing at that point to kind of say, well, I told you so?
I thought actually in the run-up to the game, the second leg, he looked like a man who kind of knew what was coming. I thought there was a slight... I mean, he was all his public messages were, this tie's not done. This is a very dangerous team we're playing against. I think he knew the limitations of his squad. And that goes back to your point about shutting up shop, I guess, doesn't it? You know, does that make the tactics more baffling? Maybe he saw no point. Maybe he thought the only way they could really negotiate that tie was to score a goal and try and put it to bed, which he did, and it still couldn't do it. I mean, Chris Sutton's always interested in this, isn't he? Chris Sutton said from the start that he worries that his old manager will tarnish his legacy, that he maybe shouldn't have come back, that he maybe should have sailed off into the sunset in the summer. And you will get a lot of supporters now who will agree with that analysis. I am, well, like you can say that the tactics and the substitutions and so on, he got it wrong there, and of course he did. But am I laying all the blame at his door for where Celtic are now? Not really.
It's an interesting time ahead. I think you need a board with that modicum of humility to actually, you know, say we're going to look at ourselves, change the strategy, and then obviously try and satisfy the demands of the supporters, not to the extent where people are expecting them to win European trophies like the Champions League. But when you consider Rangers have been in 2 European finals, you know, since the start of 2000, I think, you know, the argument of the liquidation of Rangers is a totally different argument now. I think you can still balance the budget and have a better recruitment policy, which the Celtic fans highlighted. You can have a different strategy on the type of players you're recruiting. And of course, the other thing long term is you have to have a strategy in place and a structure in place that says, can we get academy players through? Is there a sufficient investment in that? Is there a sufficient investment in quality Scottish players that they should be looking for? And is there a long-term strategy and a manager that's allowed to bring in his own coaching staff to take them forward? And all of those things Will they be addressed in the forthcoming months?
It's usually difficult. Like bringing players through, we've seen has got structural problems. There was a boy signed for Fulham last year, Gannon Dokes gone. He said there's almost a case now for saying what we got this academy for.
Yeah.
Because you know what, we're bringing through a Colby Donovan. You know, we're bringing through players for the first team every 3 or 4 years. We're certainly filling up, other teams in Scotland with players, but the very best ones, the very best prospects, are going to England when they're 16. We're really struggling to handle on them. And you've got to look at yourself and say, well, what is it? And that's a huge one to think about. That would take the
Well, that's for the clubs on September the 4th to talk about, isn't it? That's why the SFA are having this big summit. And that gets back to the core point, which is that when it's a very different game, of course it is. Bosman, Brexit, TV deals. But Scottish clubs had success in Europe when they were full of Scottish players who were born and bred here and reared here. There was a time when Scotland was capable of producing world-class footballers, and we're not doing it anymore. And yeah, I accept the point that the English clubs are poaching them away young for big money. That's a fair point. But equally, if they stay here, they're not playing first-team football either. So, they might be as well going there and actually enhancing their currency and their value, if you like, in the hope of getting a better move if it all goes wrong. I think there's a bigger problem. I spoke to Chris Docherty, the old men's elite strategy, the chief at the SFA, about this a couple of weeks ago. He's now in San Diego. He says, look, we're making excuses. Our teams are failing in Europe. We talk about the players going south. We talk about not having a pathway. We're just not producing enough good players in enough depth. And that's as applicable to Celtic as it is to anyone.
And I was speaking to a Hearts fan this morning who was talking about, the situation that Celtic find themselves in. There's no point in us obviously discussing what could happen with Hearts against Rapid Vienna. The odds are stacked against them as well. But that will probably come in Friday's show. But what we can say is within the next 24 hours, I suggested to him, we're all looking individually and criticising and laughing at each other's predicament from each supporter's fan base. And it's really like 4 or 5 men in the middle of the manure, and one's laughing at one because they're not as thick in it as the other. And by the time we get to Friday, we could be analysing Rangers out of Europe to Jablonec, and Hibs have not got it easy. Forgive me, Motherwell fans, but Motherwell are out against Freiburg.
We have this annual thing, don't we, where the inevitable happens. And we're such a kind of small-minded nation in terms of football, in terms of toughest-teak rivalries, bit of bigotry, there's anger, there's Yabu sucks, there's one-upmanship. And what you finish up with is this, whose result was the least worst? And yours was worse than ours. And while all that's happening, Europe is sailing serenely off into the sunset, while Scotland is left behind, as you say, sinking deeper into quicksand. And until we go back to this point about the summit on September the 4th, until we acknowledge that culturally, technically, structurally, we are getting this badly wrong, I don't see how anything changes.
The worst thing about this, and Hugh mentioned it at the start of the programme, Stephen, is quite simply because of the coefficient, which is dropping dramatically year on year, we're now faced with a situation where year on year coming up in the next 4 or 5 years, clubs are going to be facing 2 and 3 qualifiers. So we not only could be starved of Champions League football, my God, we could be starved of Europa League football.
Well, yeah, I mean, the champions of Scotland this season will have to play 2 qualification rounds to get to Champions League next year. So they find it hard enough playing 1. The flip side of that, ironically, is we're going down to 4 teams from 5. That might not be a bad thing in some ways, because there will be less defeats. And if Celtic are playing in the Europa League, let's be honest, that's their level now. A team which surrenders a 4-goal lead in 60 minutes against the champions of Austria has absolutely no business mixing it with Arsenal or Real Madrid or Barcelona or PSG. They're better off in the Europa League. And the kind of flip side of this, the irony is actually Celtic might win some games in the Europa League. They wouldn't have done that in the Champions League, I suspect.
What about the other clubs?
I'm with you. Motherwell are for no fault of their own, because I don't think Freiburg should be in that competition in the first place, but they're agora. It looks like Hearts are pretty much done for. Rangers, can you be confident about Rangers in their current plight with their defensive frailties? I'm not sure you can be.
Hibs?
No, Hibs. Hope for Hibs. 0-0 going into the second leg against a good opposition. I like the boy Owen Elding. I know he missed a penalty in the first leg, but I think Hibs are our best hope. And it would be good, look, if Hibs secure group stage football for the first time in their history, that's a good positive headline at the end of what is becoming, as a potential to be, quite a bruising week.
And just briefly as we finish the programme, the SPFL Summit, for me, is just a collection of people all with self-interest, because the evidence of that has been abundantly clear over the last 5 years. They've all got self-interest. They're certainly not going to be voting for any change of structure. A lot of them will not be adopting any sort of change of strategy from the SFA when they're under the umbrella of the SPFL. A change of structure to a bigger league, they certainly won't vote for that. They'll be looking and thinking, we've just got to keep the money rolling in as a business.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summation. I mean, it's a capitalist system, so it runs to capitalist rules. What is good for Stenhousemuir is not necessarily good for Celtic. What is good for St Mirren is might not be what Celtic Hearts will want. There's so many niche and strongly niche interests, like to keep the Premiership as it is, really strong. Then there's really strong interest to keep the distribution of money, particularly European money, at a certain level, or even to reduce it to teams in the lower leagues and keep it to the teams that are actually participating in European football. So there's all these interests, and I understand them. If you're going along to, say for example, Stenhousemuir, and say, oh, we don't get enough money from here because we're really wanting to do this, because we want to do this and want to do that, we want to get a wee analytics in, and this is what we do with our money, fine. But their set of priorities and their budget and everything is completely different from Celtic, completely different from a St Mirren. And to find agreement amongst 42 clubs with, so many different principles and so many different ambitions, I think is really hard.
And it's not, even if you put all those clubs together, what is in the interest of clubs is not always in the interest of the greater good.
Absolutely.
But funny, I went to see Keith Lasley earlier this week, St Mirren chief executive, just been promoted to that role, and he offered the view that he felt there was potential for consensus emerging. He thought there might be an acceptance that something needs to happen, but it's easy to say that when he's sitting in his own boardroom. It's quite different to get the other clubs.
I think it's different. I think the principle of consensus will be pretty strong, because I think there's very many intelligent people and they'll know there's a problem. I think when it comes down to the nitty-gritty and say, right, can we have a consensus that would take the league up to 16? Can we have consensus that the European money should be weighted this way and that way? That's when consensus kind of falls apart. But I hope Keith's right, and there's an understanding, at least amongst everybody, that Scottish football, and it has been at a crossroads for so long, but really, something needs to change.
You're getting the last word on that. Me as a host, I can only throw out here, is this the most miserable show that we've witnessed in many a year?
I've done a few miserable shows.
I think so.
To be honest, it's getting to the point now where actually journalists should just have these kind of inquests saved on F5 in the fact.
That's right. I think we should
repeat.
I think we should bring back. Remember, it was like we used to have the 10 best footballers and the 10 best sportsmen. We used to have the 10 most miserable shows. Should bring that back.
I'm sure we'd be on all of them.
Stephen, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I leave you with a smile on each of our faces, but inwardly, like many supporters, by the time we get to Friday on the football show, things could be even more miserable. We'll find out. But But nevertheless, I do hope you've enjoyed the Journos. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel. You can, if you go on the website, find out the details of how you can win a set of strips for your boys or girls team, courtesy of Hummel, our sponsors with that. There's lots more programming to look forward to on PLZ Soccer. But for the moment, from Stephen, from Hugh and from myself, Peter Martin, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.